So as usual, we start with the introduction. So the topic is news writing. And the introduction is that news stories. So we say that news stories has only two parts. And this one, I believe you know, this is the lead or intro and the body. So it has only two parts, the intro and the body. Or you can call the intro the lead. So it is the lead, intro, and the body. The lead or intro and the body. So the body of the news story is that part that adds more information to the story. Remember, the body has got a lot of all the information. The intro, as far as the topic is concerned, the topic attracts your attention. Then the lead tells you in a glimpse what the story is all about. And then the body explains everything in details. So it adds more information to the news story. So when we look at newspaper writing, we are going to focus on how to build up the body of your story and describe the ingredients that they are needed in this particular section of the body of your story. So what are some of the objectives that, or what are some of the things that we think or that you have gained at the end of this particular unit? So objective number one, you must be able to identify the element of a lead. At the end of this topic, you must be able to identify the element of a lead. The second thing is that you must also be able to identify the means of amplifying a news story. To amplify simply means to make it more, to make it have more impact, to amplify or to magnify it, to amplify, to magnify a news story. And then the last one, you must be able to use transitional devices and quotes in building up news stories. So when you look at so many stories, not so many news stories, but some news stories, the writer uses devices like quotes. Especially when we use quotes, we are trying to tell you that these are the words that were said by a particular person. So we are going to, you must be able to understand how to use transitional devices and quotes in building up your story. So without wasting time, then we must ask ourselves, what is a lead? So we start with the lead. So our first point is the lead. So our first point here is the lead. So we are going to look at the lead, then the rest will follow. So the lead is usually, we are saying that usually news stories are written in the inverted pyramid. I think this one is not a new thing to you. We have already talked about the inverted pyramid, and we said in the inverted pyramid, the topmost or the most important news is the one that comes at the top, and then up to what we call the least important news is what goes at the bottom. Again, when we talk about that, we can also talk about the story itself, the most important elements of the news or the item of the news that you're talking about are the ones that comes at the top, then all the way to the bottom. So the least explanation is at the bottom. So when you're talking about the lead, we are saying that usually news stories are written in the inverted pyramid, what I've just explained. And when you say that, we are saying they begin with the most important pieces of information in the story, followed by additional facts arrangement in a descending order of importance. Descending means that from the most important to the least important. This will contrast with the normal style of narrative. You talk about narrative, we are talking about maybe feature stories. We are talking about maybe any other story apart from the news. So it will contrast with the normal style for narratives, which begins with introductory material and builds up to climax. That's how narratives are. You come to realize that when you're telling a story, you don't give the most important, the most important part of the story. You first of all start with the least important, going down to the most important. So a story or a narrative follows follows the opposite of the inverted pyramid. That is the pyramid itself. So we start with the least important to the most important. Why? If you start a story with the most important, people will run away after you are done with the most important. So you start with the least important to the most important. So when you talk about that, we are actually saying that the newspaper story starts so to say with the climax. The newspaper stories usually start with the climax. Why are you starting with the climax? Remember, this is a newspaper, and this story and this newspaper has to be bought for you to make revenue. So therefore, start with the most important to attract the attention of the reader. That's how it is. Also on TV, we start with the most important to attract the eyes of the viewer and to attract the ear of the viewer, the listener, as far as radio is concerned. So what are some of the functions of the lead? Remember, the lead is that part of, after the title of the story, there is that particular section that explains, that tells us what the story is all about. So in short, you can decide to buy a newspaper and only read leads, because the leads, they actually tell you all, they summarize the whole story in like one paragraph or maybe five lines. So you come to realize a lead has got between 5 to 7 lines. They cannot be more than that, between 5 to 7 lines. So what are some of the functions of this particular lead? Let me project them there, the functions of the lead. So those are the functions of the lead. Number one, it is to summarize the story. That's why I told you that if you want to know what the story is all about, just read the lead. You can decide to read the whole newspaper within a day. There are people who read the whole newspaper within a day. Sometimes they don't read everything. So when you buy a newspaper, you don't read everything. You only look at the lead. So we are saying that number one, the lead is used to summarize the story. So it summarizes the whole story. So some people usually read the lead. You find that somebody has said, somebody buys a newspaper and tells you that I am done reading the whole newspaper. This person don't think that he has been reading everything that is indicated in the newspaper. It actually means that this person has been reading the lead. So once you read the lead, it actually summarizes the whole story. Number two, the lead is used to provide answers to questions. Remember, as a journalist, always as you are gathering news, there are some questions that you need to do what? To ask yourself as you are gathering news. That is who. Like, for example, if an accident happens along Nairobi-Mombasa highway, the first thing is what? What happened? When did it happen? Who was involved in the accident? Why was he involved in the accident? And then where did it happen? How did it happen? So these are the 5 W's and H that you strive so much to do what? To ask. So when you read the lead answers the 5 W's and H. It tells you an accident happened along Nairobi-Mombasa highway where the driver, blah, 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 all those things. The lead also is used to provide the quick identification of persons. Like when you read most of the lead in the news story, you will hear that Wetangula does ABCD. Or maybe, for example, like that, you find that it identifies the person. It also identifies an event that happened. It also identifies the place of that particular event. Again, the lead is used to emphasize the most important elements in the news story by placing that element in the first paragraph of the story. So those are some of the importance of the lead. Any question as far as the lead is concerned? Michael, kuna swali?
No question.
Now, because we know the importance of the lead, let's look at how do you write the lead. Writing the lead. Remember, today's new topic is newspaper writing. And we said that the newspaper has only 2 parts. The lead is also called the intro and the body. We do not have conclusion. This is not a narrative. Narratives are the ones that have got 3 sections. You have the lead, you have the lead, you have the body, and you have the conclusion. As far as news is concerned, we never have conclusions. So a news item usually have got 2 parts, the lead or the intro and the body. So how do we write the lead? So this is how you write the lead. So in writing the lead, you need to, number 1, you need to discover the most important elements of the story. Remember, we have elements of the stories, elements of news. Like there are times we talk. There are times we talk. I think it is last topic that we covered. We talked about proximity. We talked about things like timeliness. We talked about prominence. We talked about money. We talked about things to do with oddity or rare or something. We also talked about, there are so many elements of the news. So you need to do what? So what the lead does, it discovers the most element of the news. Like when you start a story by saying, President XYZ, let's say, for example, let's just take any other name. Let's say Clinton. President Clinton is dead. By saying President Clinton is dead, it actually talks about prominence. So prominence, that means we know very well who Clinton is. Number 2, we are talking about death. Death is something that is of hard news story, that actually comprises something that is of hard news. So it discovers the most important element of the news. Number 2, In writing the lead, you need to know that it decides on what lead element to emphasize among the 5 W's and a H. Remember the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. So it decides on what lead element to emphasize. So it can emphasize on the what. It can emphasize on the how. It can emphasize on the why. It can emphasize on the when. Like today's, yesterday I was listening to, I was watching news, and I had an issue to do with this guy called Edan Duale, that his fate is going to be decided today. So when you are writing such a topic, you come up with the fate of this guy called Edan Duale will be decided today. You see, you're talking about the when. That is the lead. It knows when, you must know, or it decides on what lead element to emphasize among the 5 W's and the H. In writing your lead, you need to know, or you need to use a single element if you find out that one element stands out uniquely in the story. So you need to use a single element. So if it is prominence, use prominence. If it is oddity, use oddity. If it is what we call any other element, use a single element if you find out that one element stands out uniquely. The next point, use the structure of the subject, that is the verb predicate construction. Remember, in English, we usually say that a sentence is divided into two different parts. We usually have the subject and the predicate. So a sentence is divided into two, subject and the predicate. The subject is the item or the person that is being spoken about in the particular sentence. Like, for example, when you say John, or maybe, for example, when you say the river trickled along beside the path. Along beside the path. The river is the subject. Along beside the path, the rest of the sentence is usually called the predicate. Another example, when you say John woke up very late. John woke up very late. So John is the subject. Woke up very late becomes the predicate. So here you are being told that you need to use the structure of the subject, that is verb predicate construction. So I believe that one is understood, Michael. So when you are writing the lead, use the structure of the subject. Remember, when you're talking about predicate, is the rest of the sentence. The subject is the person being spoken about by the person or the item that is being spoken about in that particular sentence. And I've given an example, the river trickled along beside the path. So the river is the subject, trickled along beside the path is the predicate. The next point, you need to go straight to the point. You need to go straight to the point. So with the above points in mind, the ones that we have listed there, with the above points in mind, you can now start your lead with any of these elements of lead. That is who, when, where, and why, and how. So now we have looked at writing the lead. We have looked at writing the lead. Now let's look at what we call lead writing styles. Let's look at lead writing styles. there are various styles, and unless there is a question. Do you have a question on the writing the lead?
Oh, go on.
And then we continue. Let's look at the styles of writing leads. Let's look at the styles of writing leads. Number one, in short, we are talking about the types of leads that we have. In short, we are talking about the types of leads. So somebody might ask you, how do we write leads, or what are some of the types of, or when he asks you, how do we write leads? Now, there is this question, writing the lead, and what are the styles? So when you're asked about the styles, just know that you're being asked about what? The types of leads. So we have lead number one. This one is called a summary or a direct lead. Summary or direct lead. And when you talk about a summary or direct lead, these are straight leads. And these straight leads, what they do is that they state the facts and include the who, the where, and the what. I mean, they do what? They include, they state, or they go straight to what? To stating the facts only. In stating the facts, you are looking at the who, the where, the what, when, and why. What, I mean the who, where, what, when, and why. And sometimes even how, and even sometimes they include the how of the event or the happening. So in short, the summary or the direct lead includes the 5 W's and the H. So the summary lead brings the central issue of discussion. So it brings what we call the central issue of discussion. If the central issue of the discussion is corruption, that is where it puts it. If the central issue of the issue of the discussion is COVID-19, that is what it does. So it brings it first and tells the reader what they want to know in a creative manner. So that is what a summary lead does. So it answers the 5 W's and the H. And it brings the central issue of a discussion in a creative way or in a creative manner, so that people might understand what you're talking about. Traditionally, summary leads have been used to report breaking news. And that one is very true. When you think about the summary lead or the direct lead, they are usually used to do what? To report breaking news or developing stories. For example, a very good example, 6 students of Matopeni University who allegedly gang raped a 17-year-old female colleague were yesterday granted reprieve by a chief magistrate's court in Kenya. You see, that is a breaking news. So when you look at that particular example, you're going to realize that number one, they answers the who. Who? 6 students. Where? Matopeni University. Who alleged the gang raped? Allegedly gang raped a 17-year-old female colleague. Were yesterday granted reprieve by the chief magistrate court. So when you read that particular lead, it answers everything about that particular story. So you would not be, you can decide to read that particular lead and not go into details. So when you go to the body now explains without what? Without a hurry, in a very systematic way. Ina explain tu pole pole tu until you get to the bottom of the thing. And the bottom of the story is were yesterday granted reprieve by a magistrate court in Kenya. So that one, most of the time, you'll find that one will be the last sentence in that particular story. So apart from a summary lead or direct lead, we have what we call the delayed lead. Delayed lead. We have a delayed lead. So if we have a delayed lead, then most likely we might be having the direct lead. So if you hear the delayed lead, then there is a direct lead, the one that we've just talked about. So let's look at the delayed lead. So a delayed lead is used to entice readers into reading the whole story. Just from the delayed. Why are you delaying it? You are delaying it so that we can read and continue reading until all our 5 W's and a H are answered. It is like a story. You are giving a story, or it's like a very interesting movie that you are watching. When you are watching the movie, you'd want to know a very interesting movie. You'd want to know what happened next. What happened next? And then you come to realize that you are done with watching maybe a whole episode without the answer being answered. The same case with what we call the delayed lead. The main aim is to entice you. The main aim is to catch your attention and to catch your attention so that you keep on reading and reading and reading and reading. Before you realize, you'll be done reading the whole story, and your 5 W's and a H will have been answered as you finish reading that particular story. But when you talk about the delayed lead, as you read the story, it gives you few hints. It gives you few hints. It doesn't give you all the hints. It gives you few hints about what the story is about, but it does not give details. So what you are doing as you are reading the story, you are finding out, you are finding out, or you are trying to get more details. Like, for example, you can give an example of a delayed lead. Sam Otieno, a standard 3 student at Kimathi Primary School, and the third in the family of 5 from a very poor background, has won the first position in this year mathematics competition. Now look at that particular lead. Okay, it answers the story, it answers the question, but it doesn't answer all the question. For example, you're being told who is Sam Otieno, a standard 3 student at Kimathi Primary School, and the third in the family of 5 from a very poor background. So you're telling us about poor background. You don't tell us where he lives. You're not telling us who you're talking about. Family of 5. You're not mentioning the other 4 people, something like that. So that is a delayed lead because it does not answer everything. Then they continue and saying has won the first position in this year mathematics competition. You see, you're not telling us what the mathematics competition is all about. Where was it held? Who was competing? Something like that. It doesn't answer everything. It leaves you in a suspense. In a suspense such a way that you need to read the whole story, keep on reading until all your questions are answered. So that is the delayed lead. Another type of lead that we have is a question lead. Another lead that we have is what we call question lead. Let's look at what question lead does. It begins with a question in most cases. And many editors, you come to realize that they don't like this question lead. Why? Because people read newspaper to get answers. So many editors don't like putting leads, question leads, because you come to realize that many people read newspaper to get answers and not to be asked questions. You can imagine you are buying a newspaper only to find that you are being asked questions there. A very good example of a question lead is, what will be your reaction if you hear that the management of your company is planning to lay off half of its entire workforce? That's a question lead. What will be your reaction if you hear that the management of your company is planning to lay off half of its entire workforce? That's a question lead. And as we started, we said that many editors don't like question leads because they know that many people read newspapers so that to get answers. I hope we are okay. Is there any question on delayed lead and quick question lead? Do you have any question?
No.
Then we go to the next one. This one we call it punch lead. Punch lead. So a punch lead uses strong verbs. Remember, a verb is a word that shows what? An action. A verb is a word that shows an action. So it uses very strong verbs and short sentences. Why? Because their main aim is to do what? To create an impact. So it uses very strong verbs. Remember, verbs are words that shows an action. Or we can call them, they are doing words. Many people like saying that verbs are doing words. Or words that shows an action. They are called verbs. So they use what? Very strong verbs. And the main reason why they use strong verbs is because they want to create an impact. And they also use short sentences. They don't want to use a long sentence. They want to use short sentences so that they can create the impact. The purpose of this type of lead is exactly that. It's actually to do what? As we said, it is to create an impact. An example of this particular punch lead is a 9 month of. Wait a minute, something has just occurred. Like when you talk about a 9 month baby, a 9 month baby is in need of 5 million shillings for a heart surgery in Kenya. Or you can say a 9 month baby is in need of 5 million shillings for a heart surgery in India. You see, that one is a punch lead. It is using a what? A very strong verb. Which is the verb here? Is in need. Is in need. Is in need is a verb. Is a doing word. Of 5 million shilling for heart surgery in India. When you hear that, or when you read something on the newspaper about that, you will go ahead and read that particular story because he's talking about a baby, 9 months. Remember, it is 9 months. 9 months baby. This is 1 year. Even this particular baby is not even 1 year old because 1 year is 12 months. So he's only 9 months and he's in need of 5 million shillings for a heart surgery in India or whatever place. So those are punch leads. We have said that they use strong verbs, they use short sentences, and their main aim is to create an impact. The next type of lead we are looking at is we are looking at quotation lead or statement. Quotation. Remember, quotation is to quote someone. Quote someone. We are saying that this begins with a direct quotation. So quotation lead or statement begins with direct quotation. The quote is then followed by an explanation an explanatory statement. A very good example is like what we are hearing every now and then. So we have said that it begins with a direct quotation, and the quote is then followed by an explanatory statement. Like what we hear every now and then on our radios and TVs, if we continue behaving normally, this disease will continue to treat us abnormally. That one is a quotation lead. And then it continues by saying this statement came from Kenya Cabinet Secretary of Health, Mr. Mutahi Kagwe, on coronavirus. You see, now there is an explanation at the end of this particular word, this particular statement. So that can be what? A quotation lead or statement. If we continue behaving normally, this disease will continue to treat us abnormally. Then you continue and you explain that particular sentence by saying that this statement came from the Kenyan Cabinet Secretary of Health, Mr. Mutahi Kagwe, on coronavirus. As simple as that. Then we have what we call, the next one is contrast lead. Contrast lead. Contrast lead. So on contrast lead, you have to know that it is used to grab the reader's attention by comparing two extremes. So the main aim is to bring the main aim actually in the whole newspaper is to make sure that you capture the reader's attention. Whether you are using punch lead, whether you are using quotation lead, whether you are using question leads, whether you are using direct leads, whether you are using indirect leads or delayed leads, the main aim is to capture the reader's attention. So this one, we are also saying that it is used to capture the reader's attention by doing what? By comparing two extremes. That there is one extreme and there is another extreme. For example, when you talk about $200 million have been found in a septic tank at the residence of a former chief. $200 million have been found in a septic tank at the residence of a former chief. In a country where 70% of the population live below poverty line, earning less than $2 per day. Now look at those two extremes. $200 have been found in a septic tank from a former, at the residence of a former chief. And in that residence of a former chief, 70% of the population, they live below the poverty line, below the poverty line, earning less than $2 per day. And we have found $200 million. You see, that one is the main aim of contrast lead is actually to contrast events. It's showing you the big contrast. So again, we also have anecdotal lead. We have anecdotal lead. The other lead is what we call anecdotal. Anecdote. What is an anecdote, Michael?
You are now up.
I'm waiting. What is an anecdote?
Anecdote. That one I can't think about it.
So when you talk about anecdotes are usually short stories. So when you talk about anecdotal lead, it usually begins with when you're writing such a lead, it begins with a short story. There's some lead that begins with a short story. For example, she lost her parents when she was 10. Her aunt took custody of her, only for the aunt also to die 3 years later. She is now being accused of killing her parents and aunt through witchcraft. This is the story of many children in South Nigeria, in the South, that is South Nigeria, where children are subjected to abuse on the pretext of being a witch. Now that is a short story. That is an anecdote. So when you begin that story, when you come up with such a lead, that is an anecdotal lead. You begin with a story. And then after beginning a story, then you're actually attracting the reader to read about children that have been subjected to what? That have been subjected to abuse on the pretext of being a witch. Then we have the last one, but not the least, descriptive lead. Descriptive lead. Let's look at what descriptive lead is all about. So when you talk about descriptive lead, actually we can actually tell what it is all about because there is description there. So a descriptive lead describes how an event happened rather than simply telling what the event is all about. So it describes how an event happened rather than telling us what the event is all about. A very good example is when we talk about, a very good example is this one. They came in their hundreds. They came in their hundreds, angry looking men in military uniform, descended on Kiambu community in the dead of the night, shooting sporadically and setting the house on fire. You see, it is describing how it happened. I'm repeating the statement again. They came in their hundreds, angry-looking men in a military uniform, descended on Kiambu community in the dead of the night, shooting sporadically and setting the houses on fire. It is describing to you how it happened. So that is a descriptive lead. Any question as we move from leads? Do you have any question on leads?
No.
Then we go to the body. Now let's go to the body. Remember we said that a news story or a newspaper has got the body the intro or the lead. Only two parts. So the portion of the story, of the news story, that usually follow the lead is called the body. So the body is the one that after the lead, we have the body. And it normally presents facts in descending order. So the body presents facts in descending order. Remember, we said that as far as news is concerned and news items are concerned, whenever you are presenting them, they should be presented in descending order, not in ascending, but descending order. Why? Because when you say the most important, when you say the least important, when you say the least important to the most important, readers might not read the story. You're not going to attack it. So you start with the most important. Then from the most important, go to the least important, so that we can attract the readers first. So the body presents facts in descending order of importance. And when you talk about the body amplifies the story, just like we said, by providing additional information. You see, the lead is to catch. It's just like when you put a bait, you want to do what? You want to trap maybe a fish, or you want to trap an animal like a rat. The only thing that you put there is food. Once it sees the food, it goes to do what? Once it sees the food attracts the rat or whatever animal you want to trap into the trap until it gets in there trying to get the food. The same case with the lead. Once the lead gets hooks the readers, then what happens? We have the body. Now we are being told that the body presents facts in descending order of importance. They amplify the story by providing what we call additional information. This additional information can be names, they can be descriptions, they can be quotes, they can be conflicting viewpoints, they can be explanations, they can also be background data, and so on and so forth. When you talk about news stories again, they usually end with their least important details. That's when we said that news is presented in an inverted pyramid, that they end with their least important details. For example, if two cars collide, injuring several people, an inverted story about the accident might contain the following sequence. So you will have the lead, you will have the body, and you will have the conclusion. The lead, the body, and the conclusion. So that is the sequence that the story will follow.
No, I didn't hear that statement. Where you are explaining what does the conclusion?
We are saying that if two cars collide, injuring several people, an inverted pyramid story about the accident might contain the following sequence of paragraphs. So it might contain, number one, the lead. Remember, the lead summarizes the story. The second thing is the body, and the last thing is the conclusion. So when you're talking about the body, I also talked about conclusion, and I said that a news story usually do not have a conclusion. Conclusion usually ends this way. Don't let it look like it is a conclusion. It ends with you resolving everything. You answering the 5 W's and the H in a very good way. I'm not saying that when you write a story, you should say that this is the body, no, this is the intro, or this is the lead, this is the body, and then we have the conclusion. Now, end your story in such a way that you resolve everything. You answer all the questions you answer all the questions that you're supposed to answer. These are the 5 W's and a H. So from there, is there any question? I want to go into transitional devices.
So a body
Mm.
is the one which amplifies the story. Yeah.
You're saying that a body
is the one which amplifies the story.
I'm not getting you clearly.
The body,
Mm-hmm.
so it is the one which amplifies the story.
Yeah, it is the one that amplifies the story. Because when you talk about the intro, it's the only thing that it is the only thing that attracts the reader. It's the only thing that attracts the reader. It's like when you are selling you have goods that you are selling, or maybe you sell tomatoes or fruits, or maybe you sell cars. What you do, there is what we call the showroom. You have the showroom if you are selling cars. In the showroom, you don't put the very small cars, the very cheap cars. You only put the very expensive cars, so that when people look at those cars, they get attracted to those cars. And the most clean car and the latest arrival, those are the only ones that you put in the showroom. The rest, maybe they are at, they are somewhere, maybe somewhere maybe. When you're selling tomatoes or when you're selling fruits, you don't put put the small ones and the ones that looks bad at the front, or maybe where you keep them somewhere in the store or something, or maybe in a sack or a bucket, or you keep them somewhere where because they are not attracting anybody. The same case with the newspaper. The story begins with the lead, the most important part of the newspaper, the juicy part of the newspaper, the most important part of the newspaper. Then from the most important part of the newspaper, we go to the body. The body now, it amplifies. To amplify means it magnifies. Now it explains more about the lead. It tells you everything from A to Z. It tells you everything from A to Z. If it is a story about the people who went to Kiambu and they set houses on fire, etc., it tells you how it started, what time it was, everything, such that when you read the body, you have no other question to ask. So we go to transitional devices. So when you talk about transitional devices are, let me call them words that helps you move from one paragraph to another, or that helps you move from one section of the story to another. They help you move from one sentence to another, so that when you read that particular sentence, it is making sense all through. Transitional devices are their words. Like, for example, when you talk about therefore, likewise, in addition, namely, as a result of, etc. Like when you talk about earlier, later, next week, all those things. Meanwhile, soon after, and many more, those are transitional devices. The main reason why we have transitional devices is to combine or to make the story flow. To make the story flow. So when you talk about transitional devices, we are saying that most news stories run into several paragraphs. Yeah, you can have a story that is running into like 5 paragraphs and may develop several ideas in between and several themes. So transitional words or phrases are used to do what? To achieve a smooth flow through the different themes. As you are moving from this theme to the next, there is what we call a smooth flow. So they help stories move in a smooth, a logical order from one field to the next. So that is what the transitional devices does. They help stories move in a smooth, logical order from one field to the next. So we have transitional devices that emphasizes the time element in different aspects of an event. For example, these devices are earlier this week, later this evening, next week, at that time, meanwhile, soon after, and many more. Those are transitional devices that emphasizes on time. We also have transitional devices and phrases that highlights on location angle. For example, in location angle, we are looking at in the state capital, at their home, on Main Street, at another point nearby. Those are what? Those are transitional devices that does what? Emphasizes on location angle. I'm repeating, we are talking about on the main street, at another point nearby, at their home, in their country, in their state capital, etc. Those are transitional devices that does what? That are emphasizing on location angle. We also have some transitional devices that suggest on the picture of an action, the picture of the action. Like when you talk about Kiambu, I mean, people or hooligans going to Kiambu to cause chaos at night and to burn houses or to set houses on fire, they are what we call transitional devices that suggest on the picture of the action. Like for example, turning to is a transitional device. Suddenly they came with machetes and swords and all those arrows, and that is what we call turning to. Suddenly grabbing his hand, etc. Those are what we call transitional devices that emphasizes on action. Then we have other transitional devices that emphasizes on contrast. Like for example, however, like when you're talking about when you're talking about the money that was found in a pit latrine, that belongs to a chief, whereby the residents of that particular area lives below $2, you can say, however, the money was used to do what? To build school or to do something. So we can talk about however, conversely, but, nevertheless, in spite of, despite of, On the other hand, and many more, those are transitional devices that emphasizes on contrast. So other kinds of devices for linking ideas or aspects of an idea includes, for example, so you are linking ideas, and the reason why you're using transitional devices is to do what? To make your story flow. Without transitional devices, I think your story will look very funny, and it is not going to be interesting for people actually to read. So we have transitional devices linking ideas or aspects. For example, we are talking about the name, for example, therefore, likewise, in addition, namely, whereas, as a result of, all those are what we call transitional devices. Any question?
No.
So
No
then
question.
we continue. There is no question, we continue. And we are going to what we call quotations. Quotations. So when you're talking about quotations, quotation can be direct quotation or indirect quotation. So reporters, most of the time, get much information by listening to other person. A reporter is somebody who goes to the field to collect news. So most of the time, they are getting this news by listening to another person. So when they listen to this person, they can then decide to convey such information to readers in form of maybe direct quotes or indirect quotation. So they might decide, it is upon them to decide whether it should be put in direct or indirect quotation. So when you're talking about indirect quotation, in an indirect quote or indirect quotation, we do not use the source words. Indirect quotation is also known as the reported speech. You do not use the source words. You only report. And you do not place them inside quotation marks. And here, when you're talking about indirect quotation or reported speech, the reporters usually use their own words to summarize or paraphrase the source remarks. Like if you're a journalist, Michael, you come to me and you're asking me question, and I'm answering you, maybe it's about, maybe for example, coronavirus or any other thing, or maybe about the budget. I'll be listening to you, and you'll be asking me question, and I'll be answering those questions. So what I say, you do not necessarily have to use exactly my words, but you can still use your own words, but the point remains remains the way it is. The point remains to be the way it is without being changed. That way, when you write that particular story using your own words, but the point remains exactly the way it is, then that is what we call indirect quote. We also have another one called partial quotation. A partial quotation or quotations, we use key phrases. You don't use the whole paragraph. You don't quote everything. You only quote something small. That is what we call partial quotation. You use key phrases from a source statement, and quote. You quote those key phrases directly. While when you talk about direct quotation, you do what? You quote the exact words that were said by the character from A to Z. You quote them verbatim. So I'll give you some notes. It explains more about direct quotation, partial quotation, and indirect quotation. Then I think we are going to the last thing of our topic. We're going to the last thing of our topic, which is how to make your copy sound. How to make your copy sound. Remember, if you don't make your copy sound, it means that it is not going to be bought. Uko unapeleka kampuni yako hasara. So all time, always make your copy sound. Make your copy sound. So how do we make our copy sound? So number one, you need to know that verbs are very key. Verbs are very key. Remember we said verbs are doing words, or verbs are words that shows an action. So once you give us, or once you write a story using verbs, verbs actually shows that that thing is going on, or there is an action that is taking place. So they are the chief tools in spoken word writing. So you need to think so much hard about verbs because they are the keystones. They are the keystones of a broadcast style. For example, we can give an example. A series of violent earth tremors, shook a big area of the New Guinea island this afternoon. Just looking at that sentence, a series of violent tremors shook a big area of the New Guinea island this afternoon. That particular sentence is full of what we call verbs. A series of violent tremors shook. Shook is a verb. Shook a big area of the New Guinea island this afternoon. Another example, we can say in Rabul, the town's main road heaved and rippled. Heaved and rippled are verbs. When the main tremor struck is a verb, shortly after 4 o'clock. Another example is dozens of children playing on the beach jumped into the water. Jumped, playing, those are verbs. Jumped in the water to escape tons of rubble that swept down a hill and across the road towards them. So verbs are the key things that makes your copy sound. We also have adjectives. So as far as adjectives are concerned, as a journalist, as a journalist and my experience, I can tell you, you can use adjectives, but refrain a lot from using much of the adjective or a lot of adjectives. So when you talk about adjectives are words that explain, or adjectives are words that describes a noun. So adjectives are words that describes a noun. Why am I saying that you should refrain so much from using adjectives? Refrain so much from using an adjective because, or let's say, for example, let's give an example of an adjective. A very good example of an adjective is beautiful. Beautiful is an adjective. Sweet is an adjective. Handsome is an adjective. Fast is an adjective. Tallest is an adjective. All those are adjectives. Why am I telling you to avoid using the adjective? Always explain something the way it's supposed to be. Let the reader decide whether it was sweet or it was bitter. Let the reader decide that that building was tall, was the tallest, or was tall. Let the reader decide whether that person was handsome or ugly. Because handsomeness to you, the writer, is something totally different to another. So once we usually say that one's man's meat is another man's poison. So to you, something might be beautiful. To another person, is one of the most ugliest things that he has ever seen. So avoid using adjectives. Always use the exact words that were said, or the exact words in describing something. Let the reader decide for himself whether something was beautiful, whether something was sweet, or whether something was good or not. So use your words. So they are not as much helpful. Adjectives are not as much helpful, but you can use adjective, especially, let's say, for example, something is in the Guinness Book of Record, and it has been recorded that it is one of the tallest building in the world, or it is one of the longest mountain in the world, or one of the tallest mountain in the world, or in Africa or something. You can use adjectives because it is already recorded that it is one of maybe one of the beautiful, something like that. So they are not as much helpful. So as a journalist, especially as a writer, avoid using adjectives, because adjectives are not so much good in your writing. Why? Because they tend to slow the pace. They tend to slow the pace of reading, and they obstruct good delivery and perception. When you say it is the most beautiful flower, you see you are obstructing perception. Maybe that person had a very negative perception about red flowers, and here you are saying it was one of the most beautiful flowers. So if you are describing a rose flower, describe it as it was a red rose. Don't say it was a beautiful flower. In almost every case, adjectives or adverbs are unnecessary. Avoid adverbs. Adverbs are words that describes how an action was done. Like when you talk about she was walking majestically, the word majestically is an adverb. It describes how an action was done. So avoid those things. Avoid those things. Avoid adjectives. But you can use them in minimally. Minimize using them. Again, you always use present tense. Use present tense, because present tense gives what we call freshness of news. It makes it sound so immediate. When this president died in Nkurunziza, it was put in such a way that it is like it is happening, or it has just happened. Like when you say that Nkurunziza dies, it seems like he has just died, and maybe he died last night or maybe 2 weeks ago. So make sure that you use present tense, because it makes news sound so immediate, and it makes it sound fresh. I think that one is okay. Avoid the negative. Avoid the negative. For example, don't you can avoid the negative. When you talk about avoid the negative, don't write things in a negative way. Don't put things in a negative way. The government is not going to give bursary. You see, don't put it like that. Look for another way of putting it. Look look positive but not negative, because when you put it negative, I don't have to read a story that has got a lead that is negative. Assume that you come across a lead that reads, government is not going to give help to students. The moment you have said that, you have concluded on the whole story. So why should I read that particular story? You have already given me results. The government is not going to give bursaries to university students. Already you have told me it's not going to, the government is not going to give bursaries to university students. So why should I read that particular story? Maybe I might read the story to know why it will not give bursary to university student. But you have already closed that particular chapter once you put a title of the sort, or once you put a lead of the sort. Always punctuate your story. Punctuate your story. Punctuating your story, it means put question marks where they are supposed to be put. Put commas where they're supposed to be put. Full stops where they're supposed to be put. Quotation marks where they're supposed to be put. Sometimes you come to realize, even when the way we communicate, even on WhatsApp, on social media, you are asking someone, where are you? And then when you're asking this person, where are you? You are just putting it in form of a sentence without even a question mark. You see, now that one is not a question mark, that is a sentence that is hanging. Put a question mark where it's supposed to be put. Put a comma where it's supposed to be put. Sometimes we usually get into a dilemma. Should I use a question mark or a full stop? So whenever you come across, or whenever you're in such a dilemma, you don't know whether to use a full stop or a comma. You can use a what? A colon. Use a semicolon. Use a semicolon. If you're not able, or you cannot use a semicolon, the only thing that you can do, use a full stop. If you are in a dilemma, you don't know whether you use a comma here or you use a full stop, just use a full stop. And when you put a full stop means that it is the end of, you're coming up now with another idea, or you are explaining something now new. So whenever you put a full stop, it means that you are explaining something new. Any question? Do you have any question?
No.
So if there is no any question, what I'm going to do, I'm going to post an assignment there that you're supposed to do in the remaining time. That is assignment 1. Remember, you did cut 1, and the way you did it, I think you know, because the system was marking for you.
Yes.
And you are getting the answers. So the only way, there is always a chance to do what? To do the right thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to post an assignment there that you're supposed to do in the remaining time. You do that particular assignment. What I'm going to do, I'll actually do this. I'll put a video there that you're supposed to watch. That video will be all about newspaper writing, and then there will be a question, an assignment that you're supposed to do. So you will watch the video and then do what? Do the assignment. Remember, the assignment is out of 10 marks, so you still have time to amend your what? To amend your cut, the cut that you did, so that at the end of the day you have better marks. So that's what I'm going to do immediately. So once you are done, we meet for the other class, which is sub-editing at 11. So for the remaining time, let me post that particular assignment for you. But this particular platform, the big blue button will remain open, just in case you have a question. You can pop in ask your question.
Okay.
Okay.